Chapter 8. Clint rolled the green gem between his fingers. It gave off a faint glow that flickered as he shifted it. He stopped for a second and shifted his gaze to the fire in the center of camp. "You know, if you just changed it, then we wouldn't need this ridiculous plan you've concocted," Tristan said as he pulled his gun from its holster and sat next to Clint. The hour was late, and the rest of the party was sleeping. Clint froze for a second before relaxing. "You know I can't," he said. "I know," Tristan replied. "I didn't think you would, but it doesn't make it any less true," he said, pulling the glowing blue gem from his pocket. "I'm guessing I'm going with lightning?" Tristan asked, though he knew the answer to the question. "Lower it down so it doesn't kill." Tristan sighed as the glow of the gem faded to about a quarter of where it started. He pressed the gem into the bottom of his gun, and a small flash lit the faces of the two men as the gem fused to the hilt. "What do you think our chances are of pulling this off?" Tristan asked. "At least 50. Clint said, shrugging. "Those odds aren't great. Are you sure that we should be doing this?" Tristan asked. "Trust me," Clint said as he pulled out his Colt Peacemaker. "We need to do this, and 50-50 is great odds. No wonder you suck at poker." "I think I taught you how to play poker," Tristan said, giving Clint a raised eyebrow. Clint burst out laughing. "I don't think I've seen you look quizzical in years." Tristan let himself chuckle as he holstered his gun. "Trist, I've never steered you wrong, and I always have your back." Clint said, "All I ask in return is that you accompany me on all my crazy schemes and pull my butt out of the fire when I inevitably get burned." A flash lit the area again as Clint pushed his gem into the hilt of his Colt, fusing it to the bottom. Tristan just shook his head, smiling. "You know you've always been way too charming for your own good. One day, it's going to get you into more trouble than you can handle. And for the record, you've steered me wrong more times than I can count. And you've always been there to pull my butt out of the fire," Clint said, flashing a big grin. The two men laughed as they stared into the smoldering embers of their campfire. "You gonna be ready tomorrow?" Clint asked. Tristan sighed. "Yeah, I'm in, but are you seriously gonna try to climb into a moving train from horseback?" When people tell this story later, it has to be the stuff of legends. "Remember, we're not just any common thieves," Clint started as he put a hand to his ear. "What are we, Ramza?" he said, directing his voice toward Ramza's wagon. "We're dashing!" An excited voice echoed from across the campsite. "You heard the man, Trist," Clint said, shrugging. "We can't fight who we are. Just tell me one thing." Tristan started. Clint squinted and nodded. "You got the plans for the train from that guy in the Crystal Palace, Swift or something." "The plan is all mine, but he may have provided certain details about security that helped," Clint admitted grudgingly. "So is this guy square, or are we going to get screwed in the end?" Tristan asked. "Trust me," Clint said, smiling. "We're going to get the better of him in the end. After all, we got to live up to our reputation." The next morning, Tristan fidgeted in his clothes, tugging at the ascot around his neck. He was wearing a fine suit and dress shirt, and for the first time in weeks, he'd actually combed his hair. "Stop fidgeting," Artemis said, as she put her arm through his and leaned in close. "I look like a rainbow threw up on me. People are staring," Tristan said through clenched teeth. "They're supposed to stare. They need to think that you're a wealthy merchant. Just try not to talk to anyone." Artemis hissed. "Can I have your ticket, sir?" the attendant asked at a booth inside the train station. Tristan sighed as he reached into his pocket and produced 2 tickets, one for him and one for Artemis. The attendant took them and looked for the correct identifying marks that showed them to be authentic. Fortunately, they were authentic. The team needed the private coach that the two of them had reserved. "Everything is in order. Do you have any luggage?" Just my purse. I can't go anywhere without it, Artemis said, her voice much higher than normal. I'll need to inspect it, and then the two of you can move on to the weighing. Artemis put her hand to her mouth. You mean that you actually expect a lady to let you know her... Don't worry, madam. Female attendants will help you from here on out, and the ledgers are guarded as well as the luggage. We pride ourselves on discretion. Well, Artemis said, huffing and snatching her ticket. If you insist. Tristan noticed her slipping out of her accent for the briefest of moments. A smile crept onto his face. Don't mind my wife. She's very sensitive, Tristan said, slipping the man a coin. Thank you, sir. Please proceed to the weapons check, and they'll direct you from there, the attendant said as he waved them through. After several stations, which included a thorough search of their persons, they were escorted onto the train. They both stopped for a second and stared at their surroundings. The passenger car was covered in thick draperies and plush seats. The chairs were backed by thick, dark-stained mahogany that was carved in flowing patterns. Oh, my stars, Artemis squeaked. Look at that chandelier. Tristan turned his head up to see a flowing silver chandelier that had crystal weaving down and through it like falling snow. It even had electric lights. What a waste, he said, shaking his head. What are you talking about? It's beautiful, Artemis said, stepping forward. The cost of that chandelier could feed a family for a year, maybe even 2. It's disgusting in a world where people are starving. You can hate people who waste money, but if you can't appreciate the beauty of this place, then I just feel sorry for you, Artemis countered. Tristan huffed and began making his way through the cars toward their private car. It had cost them a small fortune. Well, it had cost the man they held up at gunpoint in his mansion a small fortune. They passed through the dining car and saw Ramza sitting in front of a table full of various meals that all seemed to be half-eaten. They made their way back and found their private car. It wasn't very large, but had 2 bunk beds on one side and a bench on the other near a large window. Thick purple curtains were tied up and could be let down to block out the sunlight. So, what's the plan now, Grumps? Artemis asked. Now I take a nap, and you can walk around and look at all the pretty things. You know women's stuff, he said, smiling. Artemis levelled a flat gaze at Tristan. Just because I'm a lady, don't mean that I won't shoot you in the foot, she said, cracking her knuckles. Whoa, darling, truce, Tristan said, raising his hands in surrender. Artemis pursed her lips and leaned in, grabbing the ascot around Tristan's neck and pulling it snug. Darling, I like you, but if you start treating me like I'm just another skirt, then I'll make sure that no lady ever mistakes you for a man. We clear? Tristan nodded his head slowly, letting his smile fade. Good, Artemis said, pushing him back hard and banging his head against the wood on the back of the seat. Tristan let out a grunt, but made no move. Artemis reached out and stroked his shaven face. Besides, you're so damn cute when you clean yourself up. Tristan snorted. You think they got some decent liquor on this tin can? Artemis said, shaking a finger at him. No booze until the job is done. I promised Clint I'd keep an eye on you. Tristan got visibly irritated. I'm not a child. I don't need you two to watch over me. His tirade was cut short by the whistle of the train. The car jolted forward, knocking Artemis onto the bench next to him. She leaned back in the seat, stretching her legs, as the gentle click-clack of the rails began their soothing, rhythmic beat. When does this thing start? She asked. Clint said the train would be out about a half hour before he'd get here. Well then, I think I'm going to look around and talk to some folk. Just don't be late. I can't do this by myself. Artemis winked at him again and got up out of the car. As she began walking down the hall, she stopped when she saw a well-dressed man in a blue blazer with sandy blonde hair. He had a hawkish face and a thin build. She froze dead in her tracks, and the man tipped his hat as he walked by. It took her a full 10 seconds before she realized she was holding her breath. She leaned back against the wall and breathed in and out slowly. That wasn't him. He just looked like him. He's dead, she said, closing her eyes and breathing slowly. After a minute, she calmed down enough to begin walking down the hall. Had she looked back, she would have seen Tristan looking out the door of their car right at her. Clint shifted in his saddle as the sun beat down on him. He took off his hat and fanned himself as beads of sweat poured down his back. It's hotter than Hades out here, and where the hell is that train? It's late, he said, looking down at the tracks. He was positioned on a hill that oversaw a good stretch of tracks. He'd made sure that his horse was well fed, and they'd already warmed up lightly, running several miles to help get the animal ready for a hard run. Then he saw it in the distance. "Okay, Fluffy," he said, patting the horse's neck. "I hope you're ready to run." The horse snorted in reply. "You remember where camp is, right?" he asked the horse. "You head back there once I'm on," he said, patting the horse again. It whinnied in response. Clint turned his eyes toward that train. He'd timed out when he needed to start. He'd have his horse going full speed as the train caught up to them. "Just like jumping on a moving wagon," he said, placing his hat back on his head. Just as the train passed his guessed best spot, he dug his spurs into the horse and the two of them jolted forward. "Come on, boy, don't let me down," he said as the horse began running at full gallop. The roar of the train thundered on the tracks as Artemis stepped back into the suite. Tristan already had the window open and the wind was whipping in his ears. "Glad you decided to join me," he said loudly so she could hear. "Is he here?" she asked, leaning in close. Tristan pointed and she looked out the window. There she saw Clint, or at least she thought it was him. All she could make out at this distance was a fuzzy shape. "You catch the sack and I'll catch him. Then you set it down and help me haul him in," Tristan shouted. Artemis nodded as she pulled her hair back, tying it in a ponytail to keep it out of her face. The train was moving faster than Clint was riding. "Can he actually do this?" she yelled at Tristan. "I really don't think so, but you know he's crazy." Clint was in full view now, and they saw him look back and tip his hat at them. "Cocky bastard," Artemis said. Then Clint stood up on the back of his horse. This was the most dangerous part. Artemis had no idea how he could hold his balance while riding that fast. She leaned out the front of the window, ready to catch the sack he held in his hands. The only thing playing to their advantage was the size of the window. It was big enough for both her and Tristan to hang out of. Clint inched closer and closer to the window when suddenly his horse veered to the right to dodge a large rock that was in its way instead, going over it. Artemis gasped as she saw Clint wobble and fall back into the saddle. He looked back only 20 feet up and shakily made his way to his feet again. The gap closed at least 2 feet every second. Just as he got close, she held her breath as she saw him heave the sack toward her and leap from the horse's back. The animal veered away from the train, and Clint was literally flying through the air in slow motion. Artemis was so mesmerized by the spectacle that she forgot to grab the sack. It slipped through her fingers, and Clint, lurching in mid-air, reached out grabbing the sack with one hand. Tristan latched onto his other free arm, and Clint banged hard against the train like a rag doll. "Take the sack," Clint shouted as he launched it back to Artemis. This time, she caught it and dumped it in the train car before reaching out for Clint's other hand. Once she had it, Tristan and her hauled Clint into the car and shut the window. The loud whipping noise of the wind ceased, and the room seemed to go quiet, despite the gentle clicking rhythm of the wheels on the tracks. "Did you see that?" Clint said, with childlike glee in his voice. I'm so sorry I missed the sack. Artemis stammered. Are you kidding? It was brilliant, Clint said, standing up and rotating his shoulder. Did you see me snatch it out of the air? I'm going to be a legend after this, he said, beaming. Let's not forget the guy caught you in mid-air and saved your bacon, Tristan said, irritated. Clint punched his friend in the shoulder. Who could forget such a dashing hero? Clint said, emphasizing the word dashing. Tristan shook his head, but he had to turn away as he couldn't control the smile creeping onto his face. How was it that Clint could still make him smile? Still, I'm sorry, Artemis said again. No worries, darling, Clint said, snatching the sack up and pulling out several bundles of clothing and 4 pistols. He snatched up his Colt and spun the cylinder before clicking it back into place. Now get changed. We don't want anyone recognizing your clothes. The 3 of them changed quickly, however. Artemis had to threaten Clint with castration to get him to not peek at her. Okay, Tristan and I will make our way to the back of the train. We'll wait there for you to get the keys, Clint said to Artemis. Ramza will start a fight in the dining car and you snatch the keys while everyone's distracted. Artemis peeked out of the car to make sure no one was in the hallway. When the coast was clear, she signaled for them to follow. They split off in opposite directions and Tristan grabbed Clint once Artemis had passed into the next train car. Hey, I'm worried about Artemis, Tristan said. Anyone could have missed grabbing that sack. She's fine. I don't know if she is. Something's going on with her. Ever since we got here, she's been a little off, Tristan said. Clint sighed, looking at Tristan. Silver City is where Varen took her, Clint said, breathing out. You mean the mage Yeah, he may be gone, but he's still alive and well in her mind. He hesitated for a moment. She doesn't know that I know that. Keep it to yourself, Trist. Is she going to be okay? I mean, does she need to sit this one out? I don't know. But if she says she's fine, then it's not my place to question her, or yours. He added, pointing at Tristan. By my last count, she's saved your butt at least twice as much as you've pulled hers out of the fire. True, but sometimes you lie to yourself about whether or not you're okay, Tristan said. Clint just cocked an eyebrow. Okay, so I'm a hypocrite. That doesn't mean that I'm wrong, Tristan said, pushing past Clint and walking toward the back of the train. You know that I'm telling Ramza you said that, Clint said, chasing after him. Artemis made her way to the dining car and winked at Ramza. Ramza nodded and immediately waved down the waiter and began shouting loudly about the bill that had been left. This is an outrage. I won't pay these ridiculous prices, Ramza said, standing and knocking several dishes to the floor. Sir, please, you're causing a scene, the waiter said in a whiny, high-pitched voice. Ramza pushed him down as another waiter rushed over. What seems to be the problem here? The man said as Ramza launched him over into another table. He crashed with a yelp and one of the women in the car screamed. Just then, 2 guards rushed in, drawing their clubs and charging at Ramza. A scuffle broke out and Ramza grabbed one of them in a bear hug and dove to the ground right next to Artemis. The other guard jumped on top of them and in one fluid motion, Artemis lifted the keys off his belt and rushed toward the back of the car, fanning her face in distress. You brute! Artemis shouted as she exited the car. That was the code that she had the keys and Ramza could stop fighting. Artemis slipped past and made her way to the back of the train. She walked into the last passenger car and sat down in the seat behind Clint and Tristan. Plush blue seats sat back to back. Ornate carved wood dyed an almost golden color. Thick green drapes covered most of the windows, allowing the new electric lights that lined the walls to cast elegant, constant glow. Did you get them? Tristan asked, not looking back. Artemis jingled the keys in response and reached back, dropping them into Clint's lap. He quickly pocketed them and stood up, walking toward the back door. The guard standing there looked at them quizzically. "My good man, I believe that we're in need of checking our luggage in the back." Before the guard could speak, Tristan pulled out his revolver and pulled the trigger. A flash of blue ignited at the hammer, and a bolt of lightning flew from the barrel of the gun and spread over the guard like a glowing snake. He jerked and fell to the ground, not moving. The other passengers in the car screamed. "Now don't go getting any ideas," Tristan said, turning around. "Let's all just settle down and don't mind us at all. Just enjoy your train ride, and nobody needs to get hurt," he said, blasting another bolt of lightning into the ceiling. It arced around and blasted out several of the electric lights dimming the cabin. Clint reached down to check the man's pulse. Once he was satisfied that he was all right, he pulled the keys out and opened the door, giving them access to the luggage cars. They burst in, surprising the guard standing in the hallway. "Hey, you're not supposed to be Ugh!" The man groaned as lightning arced through him, dropping him to the ground. "Which car is it?" Tristan asked. "2 doors down and at least 3 more guards in the next car." Tristan nodded as Clint moved up to the next door, shuffling through the keys, trying to determine which one it was. A satisfying click resounded, and Clint nodded to Tristan, bolting through the door. Clint dove in as a distraction, while Tristan unloaded arcing lightning. The 3 men in there barely had enough time to register what was going on. They had caught them in the middle of a card game. Second later, the 3 men were twitching slightly on the ground, unconscious, but otherwise all right. "Looks like they ain't well trained," Tristan said disappointingly. "I bet it's 'cause no one ever successfully robbed a train before us," Clint said as he riffled through the men's pockets before finding something and stuffing it in his pocket. "Hey, what you got there?" Tristan asked. "Don't worry, I'll show you when we're done. 1 more to go." "How many guards in this one?" Tristan asked. "Anywhere between 1 and 7, Clint said, shrugging. Tristan pinched the bridge of his nose and rubbed his eyes in annoyance. "So at least 7 or more." "I couldn't get an exact number, okay, don't worry," he said as he pulled his Colt out. "I'll rush in and take down a few of them, and you come in after a few seconds and take the rest. Easy as pecan pie." "You don't even know how to make pie." Tristan shot back as Clint found the correct key. "Look, it's your classic Leroy Jenkins. I'll run in screaming and pull them all on me, and you stroll in and finish them off." He looked at Tristan and held up 7 fingers. That was the sign for Tristan to come in 7 seconds later. Then Clint opened up the car door and dashed in. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Tristan started when he heard several shots go off, followed by shouting. He could see green flashes of light going off as he finished counting. 6 Mississippi, 7. He bolted in the door, and the scene unfolded like a wrecking ball. There were 2 men down on the ground, and Clint ducked behind a stack of crates, bullets flying and splintering wood chips in all directions. He blasted off 2 more shots and dove behind another set of crates on the opposite side of Clint. "How many d'you get?" Clint asked. 2. How many we start with?" "Only 6, Clint said, sticking his tongue out at his friend. "Even odds, huh?" Tristan said, pursing his lips and nodding appreciatively. Another barrage of shots rang out, showering them with more chips of wood. Clint held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1, and Tristan bolted up, launching a few wild shots and running to the side. 1 second later, Clint stood up and lobbed 2 shots at the remaining 2 guards. Bolts of green light erupted from his Colt, and the men went down like tin cans. "You all right?" Clint shouted. "I'm hit," Tristan shouted back. Clint's face paled as he dashed toward the sound of his friend's voice and saw him fingering a hole in his jacket right at his shoulder. "How bad?" Clint asked. "Not bad, but it hurts like hell, and I can't move my arm." Clint opened up Tristan's jacket, revealing a small flesh wound. He blinked and then looked up at Tristan, who was smiling and trying hard to suppress a laugh. "You bastard, I was actually worried over here." Tristan raised his arms and flexed his fingers. "Guess I was wrong. Everything seems to be working." Clint punched him in the other shoulder. Hey, take it easy, man. You told me I needed to lighten up," Tristan said. Clint smiled. "I did, didn't I?" He turned and walked back over to the open area and began inspecting the crates. "So, which one of these is it in?" "None of them," Clint said as he found the crate he was looking for. "Here, help me move this. You know that this would go a lot smoother if you'd let me in on everything." Both men grunted as the crate scraped across the wood plank floor. Clint bent down and yanked on one of the boards, but nothing happened. "Quick, find something to pry this up with." Both men began searching, and Tristan found a crowbar leaning against the wall. "Got it," he said, tossing it to Clint. Clint began prying up the boards and revealed a dirty cloth covering something. As he pulled the cloth away, dust went flying everywhere. Both men coughed and shielded their eyes until the dust settled. When they looked down, thick bars of sparkling silver gleamed up at them. Clint pulled off his hat in a show of respect and looked over at Tristan. "Have you ever seen such a beautiful sight in all your days?" Tristan didn't say anything, just staring at them. He shook his head as Clint produced the sack that he'd used to get in their guns and clothes, and both men began filling it up. "You know what to do?" Clint asked, hauling the sack up. "Yeah, we change back into those silly rich clothes and pretend like we got sticks lodged up our butts." Clint slapped him on the hurt shoulder, earning him a death stare from Tristan. "See how much fun this is? I mean, who would have thought that we'd rob a train?" Tristan rubbed his shoulder tenderly and clicked the hammer back on his revolver. "I know that look. Time to go," Clint said, skipping away back through the freight cars. Tristan shook his head, sticking his gun back in its holster. "Remember, you can't shoot him until the job's over," he said, shaking his head. "Nothing too serious, just juice him up and see if he pisses himself," Tristan said, smiling. He cocked the hammer of his pistol back down and holstered it, chasing after Clint. The two of them made it back to the suite that they'd rented. When Tristan came in the door, he was greeted by Artemis, Clint, and 24 pillows. "Ah, what's going on?" Tristan asked. "No idea. The genius boy over here told me that while the two of you were playing robbers, I needed to sneak around and round up as many pillows as I could get my hands on. Oh, did you guys get it?" Clint smiled, opening the sack filled with the silver bars. "Did you ever doubt me? I mean, after you saw my death-defying flight through the air. They're going to have to come up with a great nickname for me, like the Great Flying Silver Bandit, or something like that." Tristan rolled his eyes. "So, what's the plan from here on out?" he asked. "Oh yeah, I almost forgot you got to change and put your old clothes in the bag. Then we're going to slip the guns in a pillow and toss them out the window. And finally," he said, exhaling deeply, "I need you to tie as many pillows around me as you can and throw me out the window." Artemis stared at him with her mouth gaping open, and Tristan brandished a huge grin. "Oh, I like this plan," he said as he began changing. "Are you serious?" Artemis asked. "Don't worry, darling. I'm just too pretty to die from something this mundane." "You're insane," she said, throwing her hands up. "Hey, just 'cause it's true doesn't mean you gotta rub it in. Plus, there's no way I can be on this train when it pulls in the station unless you want to see me dance a hangman's jig, or worse," Clint said, swallowing. "Prison. No, you just toss me out the window." Artemis raised an eyebrow at him. "Prison is worse than dying?" she asked. "Darling, it is when you're as pretty as me," he said, winking. She looked over at Tristan, who just shrugged. "Actually, I'd rather be shot than go to prison, so I know what he means." She just shook her head and changed back into her fancy clothes and helped Tristan start tying pillows around Clint. I don't think this is gonna work, Artemis said, eyeing the ridiculous sight in front of them. He'll be fine, Tristan said. I think. They both heard muffled sounds from the pillows, and Tristan peeled the one in front of Clint's face away. Can you breathe all right in there? Tristan asked. The Silver Surfer, Clint exclaimed. What? Tristan asked. Silver Surfer. You know, 'cause I stole silver and surfed through the air. Both Tristan and Artemis groaned, rolling their eyes. Keep trying, darling, Artemis said, as Tristan let the pillow snap back onto Clint's face, muffling his reply. All right, let's do this, Tristan said, opening the window. Immediately, the roaring wind filled the car. They began tossing out the pillows with their guns and the sack of silver. They both picked up Clint and haphazardly tossed him out the window. He bounced along the ground and was out of sight in a matter of seconds. Tristan closed the door and sat back smiling. You think he's okay? Artemis asked. You know Clint. He always manages a way to pull through anything. Oh my stars, I need a drink, Artemis said, plopping down on the bottom bunk. Tristan smiled. Artie, you read my mind. A warm breeze flowed through the cracks in the pillows that surrounded Clint. His world came back into painful existence. Holy balls of Calais, Clint thought to himself. He tried to move, and pain blossomed through most of his body. Every time he moved his head, he briefly saw stars. Okay, when I tell this story, the flying pillow man needs to change. Clint wiggled his arm and managed to get it free, and began the long process of untangling himself. He breathed in deeply, and pain shot through his chest. Damn it, he thought. I must have broken some ribs. A cloud moved over the sun, casting a shadow, and Clint looked up at the sky and smiled. Thank you, sir, he said, tipping his hat toward the heavens before he started limping his way back to the sack of silver bars. He recovered the weapons and grabbed the sack filled with silver. You know what would have been smarter? Clint said to a tree as he leaned against it. No idea. Well, let me inform you. You see, if I could go back, I would have someone waiting for me right here with a horse. Now that would have been the perfect end to a perfect plan. Pain shot through his chest as he rubbed his sore ribs. Well, a nearly perfect plan, he said, picking the sack back up and walking toward town. Oh, I've never been so frightened in my life, Artemis said to the constables that were debriefing all of the passengers. We really didn't see anything, officer, Tristan said. I couldn't even begin to describe them. He leaned in close to the officer's ear and whispered, Speaking strictly off the record, my wife fainted and I sort of hid in my suite. I'm terribly embarrassed and would prefer that it doesn't go into the official report. I have a reputation to maintain after all. The officer snickered and waved them through. Tristan and Artemis turned the corner and saw Ramza standing with about 10 men. So you must be Clint's friends, Switch said, stepping forward and flashing his telltale grin. You folks need to come with us. What's going on here, Ramza? Who are these men? Tristan spat. The quick flash of a knife appeared in the hand of the man behind Ramza, and several men pulled back their coats, revealing pistols. I think we might be in trouble, Ramza said, looking at Tristan. Look, friends, there's no need to get stuffy, Switch said, smiling. You're just coming with us to provide incentive for your friend to do the right thing. Just think of how lucky you are. You get to spend the rest of the day with me and my fine friends. As long as you don't do anything stupid and your friend Clint keeps his word, then there's no problem. With that, he turned and began walking. The rest of the crew moved around and behind Tristan and Artemis. As they started walking, Tristan moved up to Ramza. What's going on here? Tristan asked. Don't look at me. I thought maybe Clint filled you in on this part of the plan. They both looked over at Artemis, who shook her head. I thought one of you two knew. She said, venom dropping from every word. When I get my hands on him. She made a strangling motion with her hands, which caused Tristan to grin. Suddenly, Tristan looked over at a boy who had a distinctive limp. Hey, aren't you the boy who mowed me down a few days ago? Tristan asked. Achilles looked worried for a second and walked up ahead of the group. I swear, I'm going to wring that little rat's neck. Tristan said, cracking his knuckles. Don't worry, guys. Clint is going to be back soon, and all of this is going to be water under the bridge, you'll see. Ramza said, smiling. I bet they're going to take us back and feed us something real nice. Ooh, maybe they'll let me cook. I could use a good stew right about now, he said, rubbing his large round belly. Didn't you just demolish like a 7-course meal a few hours ago on the train? Tristan asked. Yay, well, like you said, that was a few hours ago, and stew does sound good, right? Ramza asked, raising an eyebrow. Oh, Ramza, Artemis said, chuckling. Only you could be optimistic about being kidnapped. Oh no, I'm right, you'll see, he said, grinning. 20 minutes later, they were in a dark room underneath the Crystal Palace. The bars on their iron cage clanged shut with a loud ringing noise. Sorry about the accommodations, friends, Switch said. But don't worry, Clint's scheduled to rendezvous with us in a few hours, so just relax. Switch and the rest of his bodyguards exited the room, clanging the door shut behind them. Both Artemis and Tristan stared at Ramza. He wilted under their gaze and sat down on a chair in his cell. About 3 seconds later, the chair broke, spilling the big man onto the floor. The two of them coughed, trying to laugh. Okay, fine, Ramza said. I just can't believe that Clint would do this to us. I'm sure it's a mistake. He probably thought that they'd be less jumpy or something. Oh, Ramza, Artemis said, shaking her head. You'll see. Clint's got a plan, he said, grinning. I know it. Clint limped into the Crystal Palace covered in dirt. He looked like he'd been digging for a while. Whiskey, he shouted. Switch got up from his table and sat down across from Clint. He waved his hand, and a second later, the waitress was there with whiskey and 2 glasses. Clint poured himself a large glass and downed it in one gulp before refilling it. Hold on there, friend, Switch said, smiling. I believe we have some business to attend to. Clint groaned as he shifted in his seat. His ribs still hurt. I got your 25 bars as promised. It's buried just out. Switch held up his hand, silencing Clint. I don't think that you understand. You see, I have your friends in the basement. They're fine for now. Clint sat up in his seat. That wasn't part of the deal, he said, narrowing his eyes. Ah, yes. You see, I'm revisiting the terms of the deal. You see, I know that there were 30 bars on the train, and I want them all. Clint cleared his throat. I thought that you were honorable. I don't like being swindled. 3 men all stood up suddenly, hands going to pistols before Switch held up his hand. Look, you're new here, and you pulled a major heist on my turf. You see, I won't be able to pull anything round here for a while unless I want the attention of certain unpleasant folk raining down on me, he said, taking a sip of the whiskey in front of him. So why don't you just tell me where you buried my 25 bars and your 5? Once my men bring them back, then you and your friends will be free to leave. What assurance do I have that you won't just put me and mine in the ground once you got your silver? Clint asked. Look, you see, this is how it works around here. I get to keep your first score. Think of it as the price of admission. Then later on, I give you jobs based on my first take. Something like this is going to buy you into my good graces, and I find your particular set of skills valuable, Switch said, pouring himself another little bit. I don't work for men who double-cross me, Clint said through clenched teeth. I'm afraid that you don't have much choice in the matter, Switch said, snapping his fingers. Achilles limped over and produced a pen and paper on the table before returning to his seat. The locations, Switch said, smiling and sliding the paper over to Clint. Clint stared at the paper and downed the remainder of his whiskey. He was starting to feel a bit fuzzy, but the pain in his side was gone. He snatched up the pen and wrote down 2 locations, handing it back over to Switch. Switch handed it off to one of his many henchmen, and they quickly filled out of the door. I'm assuming that you didn't double-cross me. I wouldn't want to have to hurt any of your friends. Business tends to go so much more smoothly when everyone knows their place. Switch said, smiling. About a half-hour later, the men were back carrying both sacks. 30 dust-covered silver bars spilled out onto the table in front of them, and Switch snapped his fingers. A minute later, Tristan, Ramza, and Artemis walked into the room. You see that I am a man of my word after all. Did you get the other thing I asked for? Clint dug in his pocket and tossed a small ring onto the table. Switch snatched it up, inspecting it carefully before tucking it away. Why do you want it? Clint asked. There were probably better valuables on the train. It was stolen from a very good friend of mine. I offered to get it back for her in exchange for a small favor. Switch said, smiling. He snapped his fingers, and Achilles ran over to him and produced a sealed envelope. Switch smiled as he handed it over to Clint. You see that I am a man of my word. Everything you asked for will be provided. Good day, gentlemen. With that, he got up and walked back to his table. Tristan, Artemis, and Ramza walked over, but Clint held up a hand, and they all walked out together. What the hell was that? Tristan spat. I'm not accustomed to being played and locked up, Artemis said, chiming in. Sorry, guys, I had to keep you in the dark. This had to be handled just so. Switch is a very crafty man, but he has a knack for getting things, Clint said as they made their way out of town. Wait, wait, Achilles shouted, chasing after the crew. They all turned to see the boy making his way through the crowd. Boy, you better turn around before I snap your little neck, Tristan said, stepping forward. Achilles pulled up short and took a hesitant step back. Switch just wants you to know that he's got another job for you. If you're interested, then meet him tomorrow. Achilles turned on his heel and started making his way back through the crowded streets. Tristan started after him, but Artemis grabbed his arm. Let him go, he's just a boy, she said. Tristan tugged his arm away and turned on Clint. You don't get to cut me out of plans ever again, he said, stepping very close to Clint. Clint raised his hands up in surrender. Okay, I swear never again. Tristan huffed and stomped off ahead of them. Unless I have to, Clint said under his breath, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. The whole crew was in a sour mood as they got back to camp. I can't believe we did that whole job and didn't even get a cut, Tristan said, slumping down. Oh, we got a cut, Clint said, smiling. What? The group said in unison, turning toward Clint. Clint stepped over to a blanket on the ground and whipped it off, taking a bow. Underneath sat 10 gleaming silver bars. I don't understand, Artemis said, gapping at the tiny fortune. I told you guys he had a plan, Ramza said, grabbing Clint up in a bear hug. I'll never doubt you again, Ramza said, squeezing the life out of Clint. Pain blossomed anew in Clint's chest, and he began coughing and wheezing. Ramza set him down with a worried look on his face. I don't think he's okay, Ramza blurted out. What's wrong? Artemis said, rushing to his side and opening his shirt. They all saw the giant bruises that racked over his chest. Artemis put her ear to his chest, listening for what she'd feared. I think a broken rib pierced his lungs, she said, looking at Clint, who abruptly passed out. Get it! She shouted at Tristan, who rushed over, rifling through their things. I'm sorry, Clint. I swear I didn't know. Ramza started blubbering. I'm sorry. Ramza, shut up. No one knew, or else we'd have fixed him up sooner. Tristan came back with a medkit, and Artemis pulled out a knife and slid it into Clint's side. The pressure released, and his lungs started to reinflate. He gasped suddenly and woke up, the pain and alcohol fighting each other. "Should we use?" Ramza started. "No," Artemis said forcefully. "No, he'll be okay. We just need him to rest and get some food in him." "But what if he?" Artemis put her hand on Ramza. "He'll be okay. You know how much that hurts, and Clint really hates it. If we need to, we'll use it, but not if we can avoid it." Tristan nodded in agreement. "He's tough. He'll be fine. Why don't you start a stew? He's going to need something soon." Ramza jumped up and started filling his pot. The work helped to calm him down. "Let's get him into bed." Artemis said, "You trying to take advantage of me?" Clint said, his head bobbing back and forth. "He's going to be fine," Artemis said, with the barest hint of worry in